What if I told you that the reason you're not making the progress that you're wanting from your writing is that you aren't going small enough? Provocative, right? You're thinking big. You're networking with writers. You're submitting work every week. You're researching agents. You're writing a Substack and preparing a mailing list. You're promoting your books on every social platform, interacting with readers in book forums. And all of this you're making time for, probably stealing from your daily writing time. What if, instead, you paid attention to the next small action that would do the most good? The most good now. Not 5 years from now, today. Not if this happens or that happens. Not if you land that big writing deal or if your book becomes a movie, then you'll be ready for it. What can you do today that will move you forward today? That is the topic of the book that we're going to look at, The One Thing by Gary Keller. The surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. So the big standout idea in this book is to try to whittle down your absolute necessaries for today to the one thing that is going to move you forward the best. It is to figure out your Pareto principle, or however you pronounce that, and cut it down even further. This book is from 2012, which was definitely in the thick of the hustle grind set, when it was like not only going strong, but was pretty much unquestioned. So when I initially read this book, I really liked this paring back approach. Instead of figuring out how to cram more into your day, you figure out how to do fewer things better. Keller explains that going small is ignoring all the things you could do and doing what you should do. It's recognizing that not all things matter equally and finding the things that matter most. It's a tighter way to connect what you do with what you want. It's realizing that extraordinary results are directly determined by how narrow you can make your focus. Like many of these books, it's written from a place of privilege, where at your workplace you have actual autonomy over how you do things, especially with how so many workplaces are now implementing monitoring software onto people's computers. You could tell this was written by somebody probably from the C-suite. You might not have control over these things. You might not have control over how many meetings you attend, how many emails you have to answer, how many tasks set up on your plate. But you do have control over all of that when it comes to your writing. Don't create franticness because that's what you're accustomed to. The way to get the most out of your work and your life is to go as small as possible. Most people think just the opposite. They think big success is time-consuming and complicated. As a result, their calendars and to-do lists become overloaded and overwhelming. Success starts to feel out of reach, so they settle for less, unaware that big success comes when we do a few things well. They get lost trying to do too much and in the end, accomplish too little. So my proselytizing goal is to denounce the myth of the genius, the natural talent. We love the idea of this genius to whom greatness just comes easily. In Grit, Duckworth, I believe, talks about school for classical musicians. The correlations between the people who put in the most practice and their position in the orchestra is exact. These are the most talented musicians, and they also are the musicians with the narrowest focus, who put in the work on a regular basis. Honestly, it probably does start as talent, but that just makes them special enough to want to continue pushing forward. Those who rely on that alone fall by the wayside. Practice is what keeps them special. Their success isn't complicated. It's simple, but it's not easy. Getting deep into something, you have to push through frustration, boredom. You have to walk past, like the meme of the guy walking with his girlfriend and looking over his shoulder at whatever the new fun obsession you have is. It means facing your shortcomings and grappling with them. Staying shallow and feeling busy, we hate it, right? And yet, it can be comparably easy to this sort of focused work. As Thoreau says, it's not enough to be busy. So are the ants. The question is, what are we busy about? Okay, so how do you make a book some 220 pages long about doing the one thing? Well, large font is one answer. And then, spitting it out and covering maybe some familiar territory. The bulk of the book covers the 6 lies between you and success. We're going to just run through them quickly. Lie 1, everything matters equally. Yes. Thank you. I read these books, so many of them coming from the self-improvement hustle bros that say, how you do everything is how you do anything. And it makes me go nuts. I truly believe this sentiment comes from people who don't have to work deeply and concentrate on things. But I had a video about false obligations that was about this, so let's just move on. Lie number 2, multitasking. People can't actually multitask, at least with their conscious mind. You can get so accustomed to some things that you can put things on autopilot. I mean, you can drive your car and talk on the phone at the same time, but as soon as something happens in your driving that drags you out of that autopilot, suddenly you're unable to speak, right? I absolutely know it's true that I cannot multitask. Once again, multitasking is the myth of people who do work that doesn't require concentration. 3, the lie of a disciplined life. Basically, I think that this boils down to get disciplined at your one thing and develop that discipline into a habit. I think that maybe what I can add to this is just to say that likely, if you start a new project that really grips your imagination, you will have another short honeymoon period. If you're not regularly writing, use that time to turn your regular writing schedule into a habit. And then make that habit as easy to develop as possible. I think that Atomic Habits is a really good book on this. It's about how to rely as little on the next lie as possible. Lie number 4, willpower is always on will call. I don't find that as clever as the writer does. Okay, but it is a good thing to talk about because you just see people talking about just pushing through, about not whining, just shut up and do it. And it's the wrong approach. It's what leads you to burnout when you're talking about doing something that takes decades to see success in. Willpower wears out by the end of the day. So there are tons of studies about this. In this book, they reference a study where undergraduates were asked to remember either a 2-digit number or a 7-digit number. These students, as a reward for their hard work, were offered a snack, either a piece of cake or fruit. Students who had to remember the 7-digit number were twice as likely to choose cake. Not only has this been reproduced in tons of different studies, but you have to have seen it in your own life when you come home tired and frustrated, and that's the day that you turn to the bag of chips. So, since willpower is limited, use your willpower for the one thing that matters. Don't give it to your day job. 5, the lie of a balanced life. Knowing when to pursue the middle and when to pursue the extremes is in essence the true beginning of wisdom. Extraordinary results are achieved by this negotiation with your time. I don't think that the lie of a balanced life necessarily applies to us with our focus on writing. I think we have to have a relatively well-balanced life if we're going to be consistent for as long as it takes to make progress in writing. But as I sat with this, it did bring to mind the way that when I got my first book deal, it was to be published well over a year out, which, that's perfectly normal. But someone dropped from the publisher's schedule for that year, the same year. And the publisher said that I could have that spot if I could make the requested revisions in 2 weeks. The problem was I literally got the email as I was checking my phone after getting off of a plane where we had just landed with my immediate family to visit extended family for a 2-week vacation. I did not do the balanced life thing. I borrowed a laptop, and though I only worked until noon before joining everyone else, I got those revisions done within the 2 weeks. So I guess there will be an occasional need to recognize when you need to let things get out of balance. But in the writing game, I think that that's more of a rarity. I would say actually that it is important to live as balanced of a life as possible, because regularity is the thing that is important for us. Staying in the game, making constant, steady progress. We're not talking about putting crunch time in for a year to make your killer app. Writers have to think in terms of decades. One quote, though, that I did really like from this section is, change balancing to prioritizing, and it will happen naturally. When you act on your priority, you'll automatically go out of balance, giving more time to one thing over another. Line number 6, big is bad. Now this is funny because at the beginning of this, I told you to go small because, I was quoting the one thing directly. So it's funny, but our aim can be big and audacious. Our focus needs to be small. And we, as writers, really are going for something very big. We're trying to accomplish something which almost everyone seems to want to do, and yet almost no one does. And one reason is because at multiple points, it's easy to get frustrated and intimidated. Mention big with achievement, and their first thoughts are hard, complicated, and time-consuming. Difficult to get there and complex once you do, pretty much sums up their views. Overwhelming and intimidating is what they feel. So I think that I think the big takeaway from this section is important. The boundaries that you either set or accept define the limits of what you can do. I think the best example of this, which isn't even mentioned in the book, is the 4-minute mile. It was literally thought to be impossible since the invention of clocks and running. The first 4-minute mile is usually attributed to the English athlete Roger Bannister, who ran it in 1954 at age 25, in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. The mile record has since been lowered by 16.27 seconds. As of June 2022, the 4-minute barrier has been broken by 1,755 athletes. Now, this still definitely makes you an elite athlete, but people thought that it was impossible. And then after the first time it was done, it was repeated 1,700 more times, and in very quick succession after that. It took all of recorded history to hit 4 minutes because everyone had built it up into this thing. And then over and over and over again, it was broken afterward. Whatever you think is your limit really is your limit. It's very unlikely someone is going to step in, see something in you, and pull you up. That happens in the movies and our books, but nobody cares in real life. This book talks about big, I will say here though, that this book talks about big external goals, which can be very dangerous for an author. Moving your focus to something outside of yourself is just wishing. But I think not setting limits on what you yourself can accomplish is very important. What we fear, we avoid. What we fear, we work not to experience. Don't fear big. Fear mediocrity. Fear waste. Fear the lack of living to your fullest. But like I said, these big things have to be big internal things. His example of big dreamers who then make it big is J.K. Rowling, without acknowledging that many, many writers have worked just as hard as her with just as much on the line while only receiving a small fraction or none of the success that she's had. Your goals have to be ones that you can achieve without any outside validation, or you are eventually going to get ground down and quit. Your goal is to write a book. Your goal is to write 10 books. Try something new and difficult with each book and improve in those areas each time. That is practice. Turning out the same thing over and over again, getting comfortable, that's not going to make you improve. You own the work. You don't own how it is received or rewarded. Meaning you own the journey, and the journey has to be the point. So this whole book comes down to the focusing question. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? You're supposed to ask yourself this every day. But for 99% of days, we know what we need to do. The diagram found at the end of the book, though, is funny. So, after all that rigmarole, now you have 7 things to do. And we're back to step 1. I'm going to quote a part of the book that I was not sure was applicable to writers, but which I just find mind-blowing. In 1983, Loren Whitehead wrote in the American Journal of Physics that he discovered that domino falls could not only topple many things, they could also topple bigger things. He described how a single domino is capable of bringing down another domino that is actually 50% larger. In 2001, a physicist from San Francisco's Exploratorium reproduced Whitehead's experiment by creating 8 dominoes out of plywood, each of which was 50% larger than the one before. The first was a mere 2 inches. The last, almost 3 feet tall. The resulting domino fall began with a gentle tick and quickly ended with a loud slam. Imagine what would happen if this kept going. If a regular domino fall is a linear progression, Whitehead's could be described as a geometric progression. The result defies the imagination. The 10th domino would be almost as tall as NFL quarterback Peyton Manning. By the 18th, you're looking at a domino that would rival the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The 23rd domino would tower over the Eiffel Tower, and the 31st would loom over Mount Everest by almost 3,000 feet. Number 57 would practically bridge the distance between the Earth and the Moon. My first question was, why did it take 18 years to test this theory? Now, I haven't gone on to look. Maybe the author just decided to quote a test of it 18 years later, but okay. You do the right thing, and then you do the next right thing. Over time, it adds up, and the geometric potential of success is unleashed. But while that is a really thrilling idea, my immediate thought was it just does not apply that well to writing. We are making the thing. Improving at writing isn't geometric. It definitely slows down after you get a few key things figured out. And despite what the 1,000,001 books, providing J.K. Rowling as an example, say, dedicating and really giving it your all and having no other backup plan and even being really, really good is no guarantee of financial success. But like I said, it's such a cool fact that I was trying to figure out how to include it, even if it was just to ask all of you, like, what if there's a way that you think that it applies to a writing career. And I just kept thinking about it. I started to look at my own story in a slightly different light. And I think that it's a good illustration of how powerful this effect can be regarding like external goals, but also how dangerous that can be. Like I said, Gary Keller is a businessman, I believe primarily a salesman who spent his career training other salesmen and like life coaching. Salesmen take useful things no one enjoys making and sells them to people who need them. That is not that hard, and that is not our situation. That is also a really good illustration of why you need to be careful taking advice away from these productivity books as a writer. But I did start thinking about my own personal journey and how it started from something so small, and but how each success really did amplify the next. I started with short stories that I wrote for a creative writing class when I was either a sophomore or junior in college. I hadn't written a story since I was in junior high. They got a good reception from the class, and that little tiny something, that little domino falling, turned into me writing a bunch of short stories and me writing novels. Self-publishing those novels got me good reviews and landed my books on a number of horror best of the year lists. That little thing back in the blog days got a publisher's attention and turned into a writing contract. The traditionally published book led to good enough sales that it got me a multi-book contract. And this all led to me gaining a significant amount of cred. A horror director found my books, and that led to us working together. When the story is laid out like that, it does seem like this domino effect, right? So what is my argument against it? What isn't apparent are the huge year-long gaps between each of those dominoes, where it looked like absolutely nothing would come of anything, where I looked like a fool, where I looked like some head in the clouds wannabe artist. The gaps were so large that nothing looked like momentum, like geometric or otherwise. Honestly, it could have looked like, if you waited for a reasonable amount of time between each achievement, like each one was a disappointment and kind of a failure. The reason that it wasn't is that I didn't stop doing my one thing to wait for the next success. I kept writing day after day, except once, which I have talked about at length in other videos. So now I'm in a Hubbard pattern again. The almost sure thing funding for the movie, the big name that was supposed to be attached to it, it fell through. Is it another big failure? I mean, maybe it is, like right now, but that can't be my focus. I'm not saying wait long enough and your failures will become successes. That is not guaranteed. Each of these successes that I listed truly could have been the high watermark of my success. They didn't have to get any bigger. I got lucky often. I had no control over the next domino being bigger. But I will say that as each opportunity arose, my steady work allowed me to be ready to take advantage of it. If the movie eventually gets funding, an agent and big career things will almost certainly follow. That would be the biggest, most life-changing domino. And I have a lot of screenplays and novels ready and waiting for it, in case anybody important is listening to this. But what will it look like down in the details if that domino topples? It'll look like sitting down to write for a couple of hours a day. The one thing is a slim book built around one idea, which is very on brand. It's not fully applicable to our journey, but it's a nice read. If you're interested, I think it's one to check out from your local library. This is J. Allen Riker, as always, reminding you to write, read, and live.